Hello, I'm Charles Alcock with AIN Media Group. I'm so glad you're joining us here at EBACE because this is a very critical discussion we're going to have. I'm joined by four innovators from our industry, four people from very different companies who are trying to be agents of change for the better. So let me introduce them. On the far side, we have George Alafinov. He is the founder and CEO of a company based in Switzerland called Jekta. And we'll get into some more details with George in a moment. Next to George, we have Tobias Konik. He founded FCC Aviation. You're the CEO, and your company helps business aircraft operators to fulfill their increasing obligations in terms of being cleaner. Sitting just to the right of Tobias, we have Sophie Chittim, who's come from Rolls-Royce in Derby. Sophie, you're an engineer, a pretty hardcore engineer. We're going to be hearing how electric aviation is going to become a reality. And right next to me is my friend from Jet Aviation, Joao Martins. He is the Vice President for Regional FBO Operations in Europe. So I'm going to start with one big picture question for all of you. And some of you will have had more time to think about this than others. We're going to start with you, George. So you're working on a new amphibious aircraft, and there basically hasn't been a new amphibious aircraft for far too long. What's the single most innovative thing that you are trying to achieve, and what sort of change could it deliver?
Well, as a designer of a 19-seater regional aircraft with what we call multiple operational parameters, an amphibious aircraft allows for transport of goods and passengers, whether it's from land to land, water to land, or water to water. So we want to create a product that provides a sustainable alternative to boats, trains, cars for regional travel and for short-range
just short journeys. And the common theme is wherever there is water that can
wherever there is water, wherever there is land, whether it's water, whether it's airport or unpaved runways in Africa, this aircraft can take off and land without any additional investment and without anything additionally. And more so, what we're looking in terms of sustainability is not only the operations, but we're also looking at the design stage, how we can make sure that this aircraft can be recycled at the end of this 50-year shelf life. And this we believe is very important as well.
Nobody can accuse you of being short-sighted. Tobias, you're helping people who are operating the aircraft we've already got for the moment. And, you know, your job involves fulfilling obligations. That all sounds a little bit severe, but of course it has to be done. How is that innovative? Are you trying to sort of change that process so that it's more attainable for people?
So, thank you, Charles. I think our service in itself is not very innovative. What is innovative is, I would say, are the regulations, where we help different kinds of aircraft operators comply with the various emissions regulations that now exist in Europe and worldwide. So, and I think regulation plays a big role in making everything greener, because at the end of the day, you put a price on carbon. So you make Jet A more expensive, and also what the EU has already set out to do is to reduce the price gap between Jet A and SAF. So at the end of the day, thanks to those regulations, there will also be more uptake for SAF, and people start talking about it. It raises awareness, you know.
It seems more realistic as a result. That's excellent. Sophie, Rolls-Royce made its name producing hundreds of thousands of aircraft engines, one common denominator, all burning fossil fuel. But that's changing, right? Because in your part of Rolls-Royce, tell us how you're innovating and, you know, what does the prize look like?
Sure, and I think that is the key shift for Rolls-Royce. We've traditionally been an engine manufacturer. Now we're thinking more about energy to propulsion. So that can be more efficient aero engines in combination with SAF, but it can also be more innovative or disruptive solutions. For example, within the Rolls-Royce electrical business, we're about 500 people. We're looking at electric motors coupled with both energy storage solutions, so thinking about all-electric sub-19-seat aircraft, and also looking at all electric solutions with hydrogen also. So thinking about fuel cells in combination with hydrogen and also hydrogen combustion on the longer scale. So really, it's not one innovation, it's not one size fits all. There's multiple small technology steps that need to happen to get us to a net zero future.
And put them all together, and that this is a transformative moment in the industry, I think it's fair to say.
Very much so. There's a lot of key technologies still at play.
Excellent, that's great. Joao, you're in the front lines every single day at Jet Aviation. You're supporting operations around the world, and part of that now involves helping people to be more sustainable. So please just describe for us how you're trying to innovate in that way.
Thank you, Charles. I think if I look at all the projects that we have around Jet Aviation, I think I would point as the most innovative one that we have now. It's one that we just released a month ago in Singapore, where we can have a customized SAF blend or physical SAF blend customized, so you can actually choose the blend that you want to put on your aircraft up to 3 hours in advance, and of course up to the IATA levels and the regulations, but you can actually choose what you want. So depending on your budget, what you want to do, what are your social responsibility rules at the company, you can actually choose which blend you put inside your aircraft. So it's quite interesting.
Thank you. Well, we'll go into a bit more detail later on how that works. George, you've got my attention. It's an amphibious aircraft. I think you once told me there hasn't really been one for a couple of decades. Just paint a picture for us of what this might look like when you're ready to deliver it. What sort of operators might use it? I remember you told me in Switzerland, for example, now it's currently banned to fly amphibious aircraft because people are uncomfortable with noise. So what would it look like?
That's correct. Here in Switzerland, we have a biggest challenge on using lakes for water transport, in particular in amphibian aircraft, because of the very strict environmental regulations. That means that current aircraft that were designed between the 60s and 80s of the last century, and these are land-based aircraft and floaters, because we haven't seen flying boat design since 100 years now. They cannot be used or operated here because of the physical pollution, which is a dripping of oil and petrol into the water, and noise pollution because it scares the fishes. Now, with electrification, both problems are going away. And our job is to design the aircraft that has minimal noise, and of course, as electric aircraft, it has no pollution at all. And this opens the opportunity for creating operations in areas with very strict environmental regulations. And those are not only in Switzerland, but also coming in north of Europe, in Sweden, Norway, and Scandinavian countries. Additionally, we're very much focused on Southeast Asia. We believe that the 21st century we're going to see a boost in wealth, in increased wealth in Southeast Asia, and there the population have no other choice but to use amphibious aircraft in order to reach certain destinations. And this, we believe, will open a whole new plethora of opportunities for the operations within that region. And let's not forget the biggest democracy in the world, India, 1.4 billion people that want to travel between states, but they have no possibilities because the roads are very bad. And the Indian government, instead of investing a huge amount of finances in building airports, which has irreversible ecological imprint, they have already opened a lot of routes from water to water bases or land to water bases, but they couldn't find an aircraft that can sustain this huge traffic and has economical value so that the local population can pay those tickets. And only electrification can allow us, through decrease of operational costs, to provide some product and provide those passengers, local passengers, with the flights for interstate travel.
So could this result, for example, in communities that really at the moment have no chance of getting any air service because nobody's going to build an airport there, getting them connected? And could it involve rivers as well as the sea?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is why we're staying within the Part 23 category and focusing on 19 passengers. It's not only the certification basis, but it's also the size of the aircraft. So this aircraft can be safely used in tight areas, in bays and Amazon River or Gang River.
Excellent. Now, Tobias, back to these obligations that have to be met. Are they pretty fixed and consistent from one place to another? And so maybe that increases the complexity if they're not the same. And are they going to change in the coming years as governments, increase the pressure to go green?
So we are looking at basically at 4 different emissions regulations: EU ETS and Swiss ETS, which are kind of integrated, UK ETS, which is separate from the first two, but it's very similar. UK ETS is basically just a consequence of Brexit. So, and then we have CORSIA. And CORSIA, it's a kind of completely different emissions regulation. It's an offsetting scheme. It works totally different compared to the first 3 emissions regulations. So, as you can see, there are similarities, but at the same time, also differences. And to answer your second question, so aviation was included in EU ETS in 2012. And since then, there have been many changes. Just recently, we had another big changes affecting everything from 2024. And there are certainly going to be many more changes where the regulator kind of takes the next steps, maybe sometimes learns from mistakes, makes
Adjustments and so on.
learns from mistakes and improves the regulation. And then also the environment changes. Like now, for example, the regulator is looking really to incentivize SAF, for example. So that's why they have just recently, last year, the EU has decided to make some key decisions to really promote SAF and other measures.
But to take advantage of those, I suppose your customers sometimes need some help because it's a lot of data that has to be collected, I suppose, and reported, and that's your business, I suppose.
Exactly. So let's say the customer is, we have all types of different flight departments, but no one has a emissions background, so nobody really knows the regulation, and it's like if you prepare your own income tax return. So you can either do it yourself, or you can outsource it to an accountant. So in some countries it's very easy to do, so you can do it yourself. Other countries are very complicated. So, and this is where we play our role in really facilitating compliance. So we have many operators who would not be able to comply if they wouldn't use our services, you know.
Right, it simply wouldn't happen, which is not a good situation. So Sophie, electric aviation. Now, it seems to me from what I've learned about it, it's kind of a continuum, and part of the equation is the current limits of battery technology, but as you explained, batteries aren't the only answer. At Rolls, I know you're working with at least one eVTOL manufacturer, vertical, and they're pretty close to having a prototype flying with your propulsion system. But describe for us in a bit more detail how you address the engineering challenges of taking propulsion concepts into things that can be certified.
Sure, and I think those challenges fit into 2 categories. So within that sub-19 seats I mentioned before, there is the emerging market, so the urban air mobility, with Vertical being one of our key partners in that space. Being a disruptive industry, the certification rules are still being written. So we are working with the cert bodies to allow us to be able to bring things like our energy storage system into the market alongside other providers. So working through practical testing, through modelling, to really prove out the safety case ahead of a product entering into the market. For regional aerospace, so thinking more in terms of those 9 to 19 seat aircrafts closer to the incumbent, clearly Part 23 is already an existing regulation. We're trying to fit within that with novel technologies. So things like hydrogen, for example, are coming into the space. We are looking at how to prove out fuel cells within potentially some retrofit sectors and also novel platforms. Yeah. So it is really varied with sometimes we're looking at incumbents and coming in, sometimes we're looking at new platforms altogether, and the challenges are different for both.
Sure. But on hydrogen, just quickly, people often ask me, the equation between choosing, say, liquid hydrogen or gaseous hydrogen. And because I failed both chemistry and physics at school, I'm completely unable to explain that. But which of those options are you looking at? Perhaps you're looking at both, and perhaps they both have a role.
And I think the question really is, in what time frame are you looking to achieve these things? So if you're thinking about what could happen in the near term, clearly automotive technologies have already been working with 700 bar gas. We are working with a partner, Hyundai, in this space, so they already have an automotive vehicle into the market. We're looking to bring their automotive background and their technology into the aviation sector. So we really can learn on for example, the gaseous side from other industries. Liquid's a bit more niche, but a bit more niche and more energy dense, which lends itself to aviation. So we are also looking at liquid concepts, like you say. That's more on the combustion side than the electric. So we're combining that with a gas turbine, thinking about some of the thermal management challenges. But the prize is huge in the wide body market, thinking about what we could do potentially towards the lower end of what kerosene can achieve today, as opposed to more of an all-electric solution, which will still be somewhat range limited.
Yeah, good point. So just to clarify, when you talk about direct combustion, you mean that the liquid hydrogen fuel would be directly burnt by the engine, just like fossil fuel is today, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, with some thermal management, so some preheat potentially to allow that injection process to take place.
But without having to have a fuel cell as a sort of intermediary.
That's right.
Powertrain. Yeah, good. Okay. So, Joe, if I'm an operator flying business aircraft around the world, a lot of people feel that we're kind of in a vicious circle that's paralyzing progress because, people say, well, I'd love to use sustainable aviation fuel, but I can't get it. And even when I get it, it's so expensive. And then the fuel companies sometimes say, well, we would love people to use more fuel, but they don't want to, so it's harder for us to justify the investment. What do you think would break that cycle to increase the supplies, and what sort of steps can you take as a service provider to help?
Thanks, Charles. That's a good question. Indeed, it's a cycle. There's a cycle of the demand, cycle of the production, so it's all connected. We all have a role in this, us, the operators, the energy companies. I think from our point of view, what we've done and the solution I've mentioned just a while ago in Singapore, where you can actually choose your own blend, I think that will be the beginning of breaking that cycle, because you can usually the problem is, let's say, the cost, the availability, the cost, and with that you can adjust it to your budget, as I mentioned, to your operating costs. Also, in terms of availability throughout the market, we do have free areas or free stations where we do have physical SAF available, one in Europe, one in America, and one in Asia. So we try to have one on each side where we operate. The supply chain is a bit stretched, so that's why we cannot bring it so easily to all airports around the world or in Europe as well. We've brought it into Geneva. It was very hard to bring it in, but so because the supply chain is stretched with the normal fossil fuel as well. So I think we need to probably focus also a little bit on the book and claim, which is also a solution of where physical SAF is not available. So that's a virtual sale of SAF, which is then pumped into the industry somewhere else in the world where it's available. We can do that from Amsterdam, we can do that from LAX, we can do that from some other hubs. So I think that's how we need to start breaking that cycle, offering lower blends, so easier costs to support by the operators, and offering book and claim where SAF is not yet available. It's hard to manage to get there. And of course, promoting it where we have it physically and try to convince and show that this is the way, because it is the way.
That's interesting. And just a quick follow-up, Joao. So at an FBO, most people know, of course, you're providing a full service. You have all sorts of vehicles, ground vehicles, and so on. Are there other steps that FBOs can take to drive carbon out of their operation by, changing the way they do things on the ground?
Definitely, there are a lot of other steps. We as a company, we are an infrastructure company that we see ourselves like that. So we want to optimize that infrastructure, either being by having solar panels, the recycling, electrical vehicles on the tarmac or outside to drive the customers around. Also, we do a lot of things. It's not only FPO. I can give you examples for MRO, where we have now using for completions bioresins to do the galleys and the cabins, all sourced locally. So these are the things, small things that all together make a difference. That's what we try to do. As I said, it's not only FPO, it's all lines of business. We look into that, new possibilities, avoiding travel to a customer to travel to our sites where we're doing completions. We have virtual glasses, 3D, for them to see the aircraft inside. They don't need to travel. That's also a saving. All the bits and pieces that we put together, innovating with that as well, of course. So that's what we do. That's what we try to do. Be better in all lines of business, in every single little bit. Everything counts.
That's great. Thank you. So, George, I want to go back to you. a lot of what you're doing is about applying new types of propulsion, new types of aerodynamic design, a lot of innovation. But is there more to changing than just technology? Are you also trying to change people's expectations of air travel and the sort of mentality around it?
Well, absolutely. Not only the passenger side, but also on the investment side. We need to convince everyone from investors to the passengers that there is a huge opportunity in creating a commuter transport on using waterways because it's the most sustainable way. And at the forefront, or the only company right now that is developing a 19-seater amphibious aircraft, it's very hard for us to convince that there is a huge market for it. There's huge opportunity, huge demand. Because then the question is, well, why is nobody else doing it? And why has nobody else been looking at the amphibious aircraft for so many years? And the answer is that nobody was interested because we as humanity were looking how to fly faster, higher, with jet engines from the 50s. We started looking at how do we reach Australia, but we never thought, how can we reach faster next town? I think with electrification and the possibility of reducing those operational maintenance costs through electrification, we suddenly have the possibility of being competitive with other forms of transportation when we can look into the short-range transport and provide that service for the population.
Yes. Does anybody ever ask you, well, why don't we just have electric boats instead of something that flies? I mean, would there be other ways of achieving what you're aiming for?
Certainly, but the electric boat will take you 3 times longer the time or 4 times longer the time than the plane.
Yeah.
And also a little bit more on the weather side, because then you'll need a very big boat in terms of in case there's storm or anything. And we, with the flying boat design, are designing the aircraft that can operate under first degree of storm, so 1.2 meters of wave, therefore expanding the operational parameters for the operator.
Good. And with innovation, what's the thing that slows it down the most or makes it the most difficult? The obvious answer is money. I mean, if I had $1 billion to give you, and I don't, I'm afraid, would that change? Would that accelerate things a lot, or you have to make the journey anyway?
Yes and no. Finances, especially in the small aviation and light aviation and Part 23 aviation, financing has always been the Achilles heel. But at the same time, over-financing is also a problem. A lot of companies take too much money and then they price their product out of the market. And this is very common, especially in light aviation sport aircraft. This is something that everybody has to avoid. There is also a natural progress in technology. So if we're looking at the battery technology today, we can achieve a 280 watts an hour. I think there's going to be certified battery 300 watts an hour. There is a CATL that just talked about 500 watts an hour. But still, certification and the development is quite slow. We're talking about increase of about 5% each year. So we have to, it's not fast enough as we can design the aircraft. Nevertheless, already at design stage, we have to think what's going to happen in 20 years, in 25 years, in 30 years when the battery density is going to increase, and how we can design the aircraft right now that can withstand the test of time. And that is, this aircraft is relevant today as it is in 2050. And these are really the challenges.
Yeah, fair enough. Tobias, so in your task, I'm trying to think of how technology might be applied. Obviously, a lot of it is about data. Are you looking at new ways to gather this data? Perhaps there are ways to use, I don't know, artificial intelligence or other kind of data mining techniques, or is it a job that still has to be done in a fairly manual way?
So data is not really an issue right now when we talk about compliance with these different emissions regulations, because every aircraft operator has an IT tool, different systems where they keep track of their flight data, their emissions, and so data is easily accessible. And so in terms of compliance, I don't think that's at least currently it's not an issue. Yeah.
Right, but what sort of things are you working on as you're a forward-looking company, and presumably you don't expect to do exactly the same thing the same way? Are you looking to provide other services, perhaps, or that sort of thing?
So compliance with these different emissions regulations. This is one pillar at FCC Aviation. The second pillar is compliance with the various aviation tax regulations that mostly exist in Europe. Maybe the most prominent regulation everybody knows about is UK APD. Then we have taxes in all kinds of in Italy, France, Germany, Austria, Portugal, Sweden, Norway, in the US, in Australia. So, and basically, and that's the second pillar of our business. And we make also sure that our clients are fully compliant with those different aviation taxes.
Excellent. Sophie, public attitudes, it seems to me, is part of this. You know, there is, whether we like it or not, there are people who don't feel that aviation is making progress. They struggle to believe that it can be part of the environmental solution. We had people here yesterday from Greenpeace, for example, who don't believe that. Now, I know, strictly speaking, that's not your job, but in your personal life, when you talk to people about the work that you're doing, do you find people are sort of captivated by it and think, okay, maybe aviation isn't what I thought it was?
I find it difficult to not confuse people when I talk about the range of technologies, to be honest. So when we think of sustainable aviation fuel in particular and sustainable aviation fuel blends, it's very difficult to describe how that's more green without being green itself. And people are always asking me, or my friends, when I do get a chance to talk about work outside of work, they do ask me, well, what do we have to do to get to true zero emissions rather than these kind of blended solutions? And really, the blends are a stepping stone to get us to 100% SAF. We're testing all our engines on 100% SAF by the end of this year. And that's really ahead of the curve in terms of what we could put into a product today. And then explaining the novel markets that are served by energy storage solutions. We hear a lot about the range limiting nature of energy storage. So describing the new markets and describing the different markets that can be served by all electric is another challenge, and changing public perception of what aviation is also a big part of that.
No, I can imagine. And I mean, is it fair to say that we have to consider the wider ecosystem? Fine, you might have the most advanced electrical motors or you know, a hydrogen powertrain, but do people sometimes say, fine, but where's the electricity going to come from? How's it made? Where's the hydrogen coming from? You know, are we destroying food crops to make the sustainable fuel?
Sure, and one of our other nascent businesses is our small modular reactors. So we are looking at the wider ecosystem. Like I said at the very start, we're thinking beyond being an engine provider and really looking at that wider network, that net zero power that we can provide. We are looking at power to liquid solutions, so moving away from some of those bio feedstocks and thinking more about that all electric. And hydrogen, again, a similar argument with our electrolyzer partnerships that we have in place today.
Excellent. And if I were to let's say I were to make you president of the world for a day, Joao, and you had supreme power till, I don't know, tomorrow lunchtime or something like that, what sort of steps do you think you could take to really, you know, move the curve towards increased use of sustainable aviation fuel? Would it be, you know, forcing people to do it, or thinking of clever ways to make it so that they'd be stupid not to do it, basically?
I think, Charles, I think you answered the question. I think it's a bit of both. You know, it's a bit of course, convincing the people that this is the right way to do, which I think we're doing as we go. You know, it's something that EBACE, everyone is doing it, and I think as well, again, try to minimize the cost so that because everyone is, of course, worried and concerned about budgets, about operational costs. So that's key for this stuff and the book and claim and all these sustainable possibilities to fly high. But of course, being more social responsible, like a corporation, like people itself, that's what we think. That's what we see it as a company as well. No, it's treating better, having the infrastructure more better, working better, solar panels, SAF, everything together. That's what I mentioned a while ago. All the bits and pieces count. Everything counts from the beginning to the end, and of course, the mindset changing. Also mandates, incentives, taxation, so all of it counts.
That's excellent. I'm so grateful for everything you've shared with us today. I've learnt a lot. I know what will happen tomorrow. I'll think of all the questions I should have asked you, so stand by. You might get nagged again. My Aunt Isabel is 70 years old. She's a member of Extinction Rebellion, and she's pretty ashamed of what I do for a living. I'm working on her. I'm trying to convince her. So I'm going to tell her, well, Aunt Isabel, if you met George Alafinov, if you met Tobias, if you met Sophie, if you met Joao, you might actually believe that the change is coming. Thank you.